Now, the way that it worked was that from the holding basin, this is the egg-shaped holding basin, again slightly differently shown, and the water stratifies according to temperature, so that the very warmest water is at the top, and it gets colder and colder towards the bottom. Eventually, the bottom water would have probably the temperature of about +4 degrees centigrade, or in Fahrenheit that's 39.2. This is a very vital temperature as far as Viktor Schauberger's theories are concerned, and again we'll come back and see why that is a little later on. Now, it was important for Viktor that in the log flume various temperatures of water were used, because according to the Archimedean principle of the denser carrying the lighter, when water is made to flow in a longitudinal vortex, then at the very center of the vortex you have the heaviest core water, surrounded by warmer and warmer layers of water. And it was this that he understood, which nobody else understood at the time, which enabled him to transport logs which were heavier than water. Sinkers, as they were called. They were green logs. Now, by taking water out firstly of the top layers of the holding basin, he then took water out of the two lower levels, so that he got a mix of water. But as water is a different temperature, don't mix for quite a long period of time, this difference in density stayed for quite a considerable period during the flow. Now, what happened was, because the core water is denser, it flows faster, and when the log, which is in the center of the core water, it has a cut-off end, so that in front of it an area of suction is created, which actually pulls the log through the water. In order to maintain this difference in temperature, Viktor used to allow what he called energy water in from time to time, depending on the exposure to the sun. If the flume went into the sun, he would have to do it more quickly than if the flume flowed in the shade, because temperature was very critical here. And so periodically some of the water would be let out and new water would be allowed in. Again, it was probably introduced tangentially, so that a vortex was automatically created when the water was introduced. As a result, and also to aid the system so that the logs could actually flow down smoothly, he had rifled bends in the pipe, which would throw the water on the right-hand bed, would make it curl in a clockwise vortex looking down the stream, and a left-hand bed anti-clockwise. And the effect of this was, at a right-hand bend, for instance, the vortex would go this way, and it would push the log from the side towards the center. So the logs never even touched the side of this. It was a marvelous development. It was, as far as the experts were concerned, hydraulically inexplicable. And he built about 9 of these during the early 1920s and early 30s. And now the principal thing about these log flumes was that he used the energy of the vortex. Now, the vortex is very important in flowing water, because water naturally likes to move in vortices, and it is these vortices that and the energies within them that the trout uses to stay in one place, the so-called stationary trout, which stays in one place in the stream, even though the water is flowing very fast. I'm going to leave that on for a minute. I won't come back, and I'll talk to it in a moment. Now, the thing that Viktor did perceive, which was very important to him, and was the realization that in any natural phenomenon, there are always two energies which are interactive. And so you have, on the one hand, cold and heat, or you have gravity and levity, or you have magnetism and electricity, or you have pressure and suction. So all these things always formed a unity, and whatever happened in any energetic interaction was always a reciprocal proportion between the two, that if one was slightly less, then the other was more, and so on. But they couldn't be seen in isolation. They had always to be taken into account. And so in a naturally flowing watercourse, the river would flow down from the spring under the effect of gravity, but at the same time there would be another movement of energy back up to the source, which was the movement of levity in the opposite direction. And levity or levitation, the forces of levitation, he associated also with what he called biomagnetism, which was a life force, which was the force that made things stand up. It was why trees grow into the sky. It is why fish swim one way up and not the other way up. It's why plants grow. And everything was, everything that moves anything upwards was this biomagnetic life force. And as the life force diminishes, of course, then things tend to drop further to the ground, because then they are under the influence of what he would have called the death force, gravity, which is the one which drags everything down. Now, in a very healthily flowing river, because the state of health is extreme, then the life energy, or the biomagnetic energy, or the levitational energy is at a maximum. And in this case, it moves from the mouth of the river right up to the source with a lot of force, and in the process it creates an invisible energetic jump, as it were, or an invisible energetic vortex, which trout and salmon use to overcome waterfalls. Because Viktor came to a point high up in the plateau in the area that he was in charge of, and he came across a stream, and when he put his staff in the stream, he started a trout, and the trout swept upstream very fast. And he said, well, firstly, how did the trout get there? Because I know that a kilometer downstream there's a waterfall which falls 60 meters, and where the water goes to mist. So how did this fish get here? Because there's no other way to get here. And that started him to think about how these energies interact. Now, the trout stays in the stream also because of the levitational forces which move. The stream is flowing this way, and also because of the forces which move in the other direction, the levitation energies. But there's another factor too, which involves the turbulence in water. According to Viktor Schauberger, every particle of water is, the movement is associated a particular velocity with a particular temperature. Now, if the velocity is exceeded relative to the temperature of the particle of water, then turbulence automatically results. And this turbulence is in fact the automatic brake in flowing water, which prevents water running down a very steep gradient from breaking out of its banks, from actually overrunning itself so it flows too fast. It always comes in as the automatic brake in flowing water, so that when a particle of water exceeds a certain velocity relative to the temperature of that particle of water, then turbulence manifests itself. Now, a trout will always stay in the center of the central axis of flow, where the water is coolest, because that is where the energy is greatest, because with water at a temperature of plus 4 degrees or 39 degrees Fahrenheit, that is its state of greatest energy content. And the trout sits in this flow of water, and it just has its jaws open, and all the food is moving down this vortex and goes straight into its mouth, and it doesn't have to do anything. That's why they sit there so happily and so quietly. But when, if you look at these lines here, these are the flow lines of the water, and when the water flows and encounters the trout's body, then close to the trout's body there's an acceleration of the water due to pressure initially, and in the process the affected particles of water exceed their critical velocity, and then turbulence occurs on the rear flank of the trout. And the turbulence, in a sense, has a rotation, so that part of the movement of the forces of that turbulence press the trout's body forwards, and it's able to stay in the flow and in a stationary position. The other aspect of it is that in the process of breathing, it removes the oxygen from the water through the gills, and when this oxygen deficient water comes out of the gills, then it wants to grab any dissolved oxygen which is in the water, and in the process it expands that particular the water molecule, so to speak, expands, and this pressure again happens at the reverse, the rear of the trout, so that the trout goes forward rather like a slippery soap. It just darts forward, and it's actually held there by the water itself.